What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the MMA Junkie Preview Show. I'm your host, Farah Hannoun, and today I'm going to be joined by Nolan King, who's going to help me break down all of tonight's UFC 314 fights. What's up, Nolan?
What's going on, Farah? How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. It's been a minute that I've been this excited about a card. I don't know about you, but this one just seems to be fun from top to bottom.
Yeah, we always, in 2025, we talk about having too many events and the apex and things just seeming monotonous. So to get this real premier kind of A-list product that is UFC 314 is nice. I mean, it's been a while, right? I think Oscar Willis on Twitter said it best the other day, where he felt like, things have been kind of dead in the water a little bit when it comes to the excitement with MMA. It's just been kind of routine, but this is a big one. It has big fight feels, and it's just a stacked card, top to bottom. It's great.
Yeah, and I'll admit, and I feel kind of weirdly guilty saying this, but this is the first time since I've even not covered MMA, just been an MMA fan, that I haven't been staying up for all the cards. Now, I know it's very hard for me in my side of the world, but I've always done it. I've found myself lately kind of pulling all-nighters lately, and that's not a good sign, but I think I'm just getting very, very fatigued. And like you said, some of those cards just haven't had the... Because I'm not always about the big names, don't get me wrong. Like, you don't need to give me the biggest names. Like, we cover this sport, but sometimes there are intriguing stories, and you know that more than anyone, covering all these prospects. But lately, it just hasn't been, like, one of the stories around MMA right now is, like, is the UFC in trouble? Like, are there not enough superstars and whatnot? And I know there are some big names. We don't have the Connors, we don't have the Habibs, the Rondas, the Brock Lesnars, but what do you think right now of the state of the sport? Like, this is a very fun card on paper, and we don't really get to see the pay-per-view numbers anymore. But what do you think of this narrative that's floating around?
Well, it's interesting that it's coming up around the time of the broadcast deal, right? I think that's a big part of it, because really when the UFC was in the middle of their ESPN deal, if they're having people tune in, if people are buying ESPN Plus subscriptions, if they're hitting their numbers, the target goals that they have on pay-per-views, not necessarily any incentive for them to change things, right? If everybody's tuning in and you're spreading the product thinner and thinner, but you still have the same audience going for it, I don't think there's really that incentive for them to change much. And we saw some of the, the money they've been raking in recent years. I just don't think it was there. Now that they have the deal coming up here, where they have to figure out what broadcast situation they want to put out there, I think there's maybe a little bit more incentive for them to kind of need to put on these big cards and really maximize and show, hey, look at these sort of super cards that we can do, right? And I'm not a pro wrestling person. There's definitely more educated people on staff to speak of this, but the WWE deal with Netflix, I feel like from what I've heard or some of the tweets that I've seen, it kind of compacted things, right? It made things a little bit more dense in terms of the top tier product and some of the shows that are put on and what they're able to do. So, if they do switch broadcast deals and they do go to a Netflix or something, perhaps Netflix is only interested in the quality over the quantity. So I think tonight is a big night for them to kind of show, hey, this is like premier product. This is A-list. This is what we have the capability to do this. So in terms of the state of MMA, I really think it comes down to supply and demand, right? So if the demand's there and you can continue to up the supply, and that means spreading fights thin, no incentive. But now that there's broadcast situations rolling around, I'll be interested to see kind of how that comes into play.
For sure. And definitely some big names tonight, some fan favorites. The main card is stacked. We even got some veterans. But before I kind of talk about the big fights and stuff like that, the biggest favorite of the night is Chase Hooper over Jim Miller. He's a minus 800 favorite. That's crazy. Is it just me, or is that like crazy?
No, there's some weird lines on this card. I think that was one that really jumped out to me. I think there is an element, for whatever reason, I think since I've started following the sport, where people count the old guys out, and I think there's something to be said about experience. And again, somebody's out, 40 years old, they're out there getting knocked out all the time, totally understand why they're getting picked against. But a guy like Jim Miller, who's been super competitive in recent years, fighting Chase Hooper, who's looked great recently. It looks like he's turned a corner, no doubt about it. But has he fought somebody, has he done well against fighters like Jim Miller's caliber? I'm not really sure he's proven himself yet. So I think it's a bit of a crossroads fights for both guys, which is why I'm surprised there's such a big spread there. I think it's a little bit of what have you done for me lately, right? We saw Jim get beat up pretty bad by Bobby Green. We saw Chase look really good. So I think all this kind of comes into play, but I think maybe you can favor Hooper, but I think that's blasphemy right there.
And as goes is telling you 40 isn't old, Nolan. It's the new 20. Maybe, but I think like, look at it stylistically because Jim Miller's recent losses, Alexander Hernandez, King Green, it's a striking, right? And Chase Hooper isn't exactly that guy. I know he's very improved and like, well, like rounded out his game a lot better than what he was when he entered the UFC. But Jim Miller has kind of struggled with really good strikers, and Chase Hooper has excelled with his grappling. So does Jim Miller. So it's like, they're basically putting up their grappling against each other. Or maybe it will play out on the feet for 15 minutes. Who knows? But it's not like Hooper has this massive striking advantage. That's why the odds are like that, right? So that's why I find the odds very strange. And if we look at them here, like according to BetMGM, so Hooper is a minus 800 favorite, minus 120 to win by submission, plus 550 by KO TKO. He does have a few on his resume, more like ground and pound. So that is a possibility, I believe. Plus 200 by decision. But I don't know. I just find I picked Miller. I'm not saying like I would be super surprised if Hooper won. I just think minus 800 is crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, everything's relative, and I think that's really the problem I have with it. Right? Is like, is it just seems such an extreme reaction to something that you could have maybe a moderate reaction to. So I think that, and that's where I'm not a gambler, but I think that's where you find some value.
Wait, plus 1,300 Miller by submission. That looks like a typo, right? Like, yeah. What am I missing here, Nolan? What am I missing?
I don't know. I mean, Chase has looked great. He's done good for CFFC grappling and stuff, so maybe people are weighing into that. But again, I mean, Jim Miller's great on the ground as well, and you'd think that even if you thought Hooper was better than Miller, you would think that Miller's got more game than like a Clay Guida. So I don't know. Maybe somebody's going to watch this and make a lot of money.
Yeah, so look, Hooper might prove me completely wrong and just
totally.
go out there. Yeah, I know he's never been submitted, like Hooper's never been submitted, but we talk about the caliber of opponents he's fought versus Jim Miller. But I don't know, that's crazy. Plus 1,300 on Miller by submission. Like, how's that not tempting? I don't know. If I was a betting woman, which I'm not, but like if I was a betting woman, like that just, I don't know. You got to look at that, but it's just a little bit crazy. I wanted to start off.
You might be after tonight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm saying, like, I don't know. I just wanted to start off the show with that because I just think that's crazy. It's almost like a typo for me of how crazy it is. But anyways, an interesting line there. But regardless, we've got a very stacked main card. We kick things off with Nikita Krylov and Dominic Reyes. Krylov hasn't fought in a couple of years. I know in media day he was talking about, he was booked against Azamat Murzakanov. And that fight fell apart. They couldn't get him an opponent because he wanted someone higher ranked, said he was willing to fight a heavyweight even at one point. But here he is coming back off of over a 2-year layoff, right? Against Dominic Reyes, who's kind of turned the corner. It's an interesting fight. I'm not going to lie. I think this is a fight for Dominic Reyes to show if he can get back to the upper echelon of the division. And for Nikita Krylov, who's kind of been floating around a bit of a perennial contender. What do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't fought before, right? I feel like they've both been in the top 12, top 10 for years now. So I'm shocked that it hasn't happened. I think it's very good matchmaking. And honestly, like, it's kind of nice for Dom Reyes to be in a fight where his back isn't like totally up against the wall, right? So I'm really intrigued to see what he does. I think, if he goes out there and gets a win here, I mean, we're in an interesting position where looking at light heavyweight right now, this could throw him right back in kind of that conversation for a top contender fight. And then for Krylov, I think he's kind of one of the more disrespected guys in the division. We don't give him enough credit about how good he is and all the guys that he's faced. And sure, he's lost, he's won, but he's always maintained. He's always kind of been at that level. So I think it's a very interesting matchup for both guys, but particularly for Reyes, who, if he goes out there, he wins, he looks impressive. I mean, you're talking about a pretty solid U-turn of his career that looked like it was really going downhill.
Yeah, and you look at Krylov's resume, he's only gone the distance twice. He's got 12 knockouts and 16 submissions on his resume. I wouldn't have ever guessed that, like, that he had such a high finish rate. So he's one of those really, like, quiet contenders. I know it doesn't help that he hasn't fought in 2 years, but really a prolific finisher. And then you look at Reyes on the other end. Obviously, we almost felt like after that John Jones fight, just everything went downhill for him. I know mentally wasn't all there, but it's nice to see him bounce back with the finishes, because that's what Dominic Reyes did on his rise, right, to getting to John Jones. And it's crazy how that narrative is still out there. Like, he gets asked about it, to be fair, like all the freaking time. But I wrote that story off of him saying that basically, like, John Jones knows I won that fight. So he'll always forever be connected to John Jones. But what do you think? Like, do you really believe that Reyes has turned the corner and he's the Reyes of old right now? Or obviously the level of competition hasn't been the upper echelon. No disrespect to Anthony Smith, of course. But kind of what do you think of the current Reyes that we have?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I felt like he mentally seemed to turn a corner before his fight with Ryan Spann. And then ultimately, obviously, that was a devastating knockout loss that was very similar, if not more brutal than the ones he had suffered prior to that. So it was nice to see, even though that happened, somehow him not get deterred, right? I think that Spann one, there was a big buildup. He had a big layoff. You know, he talked about switching camps and this, that, and the other. And feeling rejuvenated, and then he went out there and got clobbered. So for him to be able to still come back and win after that was really impressive. So I think mentally he's turned a corner. I feel like he was putting maybe a lot of pressure on himself. You know, there was the Jones fight you talked about where a lot of people thought he won that fight. So, you know, him feeling like he needed to go out there and there was a lot of pressure on him to go get that thing that had evaded him. I think he's maybe taken some of that pressure off. He's gone out there and the worst thing has happened, right? And he's gotten through it and he's come back and he's won a fight after that. So to me, I think that, you know, I'm not sure if he's turned a corner physically, but I think he's fighting with a lot more confidence and that can go a long way.
Yeah, it's tough to gauge because Krylov is kind of the perfect test for him to see if he's going to be back into contention against the upper echelon division. I ended up picking Krylov because this is for me the answer that I'm going to find out if I feel like Dominic Reyes is kind of ready to get thrown back. He's always kind of fought top level competition to his defense, but because, you know, his losses came to Blachowicz and Prohaska and Jones, these are all former champions or current champions. But this for me is the fight that's going to tell me if he's ready to get thrown back up. And I do think that with the win here, you could throw we talked about him being connected to John Jones. Like, you can't throw him back in there, like at the top of the mix, especially like there isn't too many people right now for Ankalaev, right? He's running things back with Alex Pereira, but you look at the upper echelon, they've all kind of fought for the title recently. So Dominic Reyes, big implications for him, for both guys, I believe, in this fight.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, 205 is one of those divisions that's kind of always up for grabs, right? It's hard to mount a lot of momentum. It's hard to really look good at times when you do win. Unless you score a big knockout, then you look great. So to me, I think 205 forever will kind of be up for grabs, right? I don't know if we'll ever hit an era where it's like, wow, we got 6-7 guys that are all, you know, charging up the ladder and are gonna contend for a title in the next year, and who's gonna get it, and we're gonna have a bunch of big contender fights. No, I think, you know, unless something crazy happens, we're gonna have a lot of the same faces. It's gonna be really hard to break in. But that also makes it, you know, for these veteran guys that we thought had their back up against the wall, that we never really thought would get a title shot or a second title shot, to be able to kind of rebound their careers. And I think that's what we're seeing here with this fight.
Yeah, because Prohaska's out there, but he's fought for the title a couple of times recently. Yeah. Now Ankalaev's the champion, but he's running things back with Pereira, so Pereira could end up reclaiming his belt. Ulberg, Jan Blachowicz, nobody really stood out there. I know some people felt like Blachowicz should have gotten his hand raised, but either way, it wasn't the scream title shot type of performance by Ulberg. So really a big opportunity for either guy if they can go out there and score a definitive finish. But if you look at the specific odds, according to BetMGM, Krylov is a -170 favorite. Reyes is a +140 underdog. Some individual odds, +300 Krylov by submission, +250 by knockout. And let's look at the decision. No, we don't have a decision for Krylov. Oh, no, we do. +350 for Krylov by decision. And then for Reyes, it's +450 by knockout, +1600 by submission, +300 by knockout. Sorry, +450 by decision. So who did you pick initially, and what are you leaning towards in terms of the outcome?
So yeah, I'm leaning towards Reyes, and here's why. I think for him, this is not rocket science, but I think his biggest problem is getting hit and getting knocked out. And so Krylov obviously has power, but I think his big thing is taking people down. You know, kind of having a submission game at 205 that's above average is very helpful. And he's got a pretty good one. So that's going to be probably his game here. You never know. He's, you know, again, he's fought big strikers his whole career and he's had some success on the feet. So I'm not ruling him out, but I do lean towards Reyes just because I think styles make fights. And maybe if you match Dom up against the top 10 in the light heavyweight division and you match Krylov up against the top 10, maybe Krylov would have more success overall. But I just think style-wise, head-to-head, this is a fight that I think is very favorable. Not very, but it's solidly favorable towards Dom Reyes.
Are you thinking knockout? Krylov's only been knocked out once in his UFC debut.
No,
but
I think maybe he'll go the distance, like a good striking performance. Maybe Krylov has some success on the ground. But I do think just what we've seen from Dom over the years when he has gone in the later rounds, he's looked pretty decent as well. So I lean towards him, maybe like a 29-28 unanimous, something like that.
Plus 450 is Dominic Reyes by decision. So see, this is the thing with this card. So it's like I made my picks. I genuinely feel I could easily go 0-5 in the main card picks. That's how not confident I am about any of them.
Means it's a great card, though.
There you go. So I picked Krylov, but wouldn't be surprised at all if Reyes won. And we'll get further into the other picks, and I'll tell you why I wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way. But moving on the main card, Bryce Mitchell, John Silva. A lot of people looking at it as a people's main event, which is crazy to say when you've got Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett, right? To call Bryce and John Silva the people's main event. I don't think it's necessarily about how the fight is going to go. Obviously, it's the storyline surrounding it. Everything that went down with Bryce Mitchell, the way John Silva's handled the press conference and everything. But I'm kind of seeing people starting to really look at the matchup, because I think the odds were bigger earlier. I'm not 100% sure, but right now, as things stand, John Silva's a minus 200 favorite over Mitchell, was plus 165. I do feel like the odds were wider when they first came out. I'm going to have to take a look in a bit. But yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people are just not focusing on the matchup itself. Do you agree with me? Like when you look at it stylistically, a lot of people point at Silva's performance against Charles Jourdain. I know he won that fight, but he got taken down a couple of times. That's what Bryce Mitchell does. Very underrated. Took Ilia Topuria down even. Don't you feel like the matchup itself, the stylistic matchup, is getting lost into all of the kind of the drama that surrounds
100%, which is it's kind of a shame, because I think it's actually a very intriguing stylistic matchup. Like you said, I think they're both kind of each other's kryptonite. I mean, Bryce we saw get stretchered by Josh Emmett, one of the worst knockouts we've ever seen. And then you got John Silva, who has looked great. He's exceeded everybody's expectations. He's beast moded since he moved up to 155. But at the same time, he did struggle in that Jourdain fight when he probably battled the most amount of grappling attempts that we've seen. So it is a very interesting fight. I think you throw in a personality like Mitchell, a very, the polarization of him. There are people that hate him and think that because they don't like him that he sucks. And I don't think that in terms of his skill is accurate. I don't think, there's people that want to see him get knocked out, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a grappling game, that he's not a black belt, and that he can't beat John Silva on the ground. So I am leaning towards Silva. I think he's somebody that we're seeing improve at a pretty high clip. And also, I think, he's not dumb. He's at a great camp with the Fighting Nerds with Pablo Secupira. I always fuck up his name, but, they know what they have to do here. They know what Bryce is going to have to do. So I think if they can get him to be, sufficient enough to not get finished, I think that this will favor him. And we've seen Bryce get dragged in those later rounds too, where he looks a bit tired. So I'm going to lean towards John Silva. I think he'll get it done by TKO, maybe late.
Do you put any stock into that pound that he eventually made weight, but do you put any stock into that, considering that he's missed weight before against Jourdain?
I don't know. I think that was at 45, right? So I think this one being at 55, he seemed like when he got on the scale, he knew he was going to make it, right? He was saying, I'll be back. I'm going to hit it. So it's definitely not good. It's not good that you're not on weight, like right when the window starts, if you're still cutting when Florida only has the hour weigh-in. Probably not ideal, but at the same time, I don't think he looked like too zombie-ish. He seemed pretty confident after that miss that he was going to make it again. So maybe a little bit, but I think overall, I'm not putting too much weight into it.
No pun intended.
Didn't even think of that.
Well, I mean, yeah, we talked about so I went with Bryce, by the way. That's what I'm telling you. I feel like I could easily go 0-5 because I don't know. Like I could see both.
It's a close fight for sure.
And yeah, because I know Mitchell rebounded the win over Kron Gracie. Kron being one of the most interesting fighters in and out of the octagon, because I just get baffled by his fighting style sometimes. But he did rebound. He did do what he was supposed to do against Kron Gracie, what people felt like he should do. But obviously, the fight before it, he had the knockout loss against Josh Emmett. The Ilia Topuria fight, he talked about not being 100% for that, but Ilia Topuria is Ilia Topuria, right? No shame in losing to him. It just mentally for me is what I'm interested about, like where each fighter is at. Obviously, John Silva's oozing confidence. He's been playing up the crowd, using that to his advantage, trying to get into Bryce Mitchell's head. It's kind of tough to gauge Bryce Mitchell and where he's at mentally. Forget the things that he said, the controversial stuff, but I'm just seeing like all that kind of hate and the pressure and a lot of people feeling like that this matchup is kind of the UFC punishing him and whatnot. Like a lot of that is just interesting. How much do you think that is or isn't affecting Bryce Mitchell mentally?
It's tough to say. I think it's interesting because I've dealt with, I honestly haven't dealt with him much in recent years, but back in the day, I did deal with Bryce a little bit when he was on the come up. He was doing stuff with Flow Combat, and I do think that over the years, his mental has changed in terms of the way, not only like he's always been like this to a certain degree, but I think the character has been drawn out more and more and more. And I can't tell if that's like, kind of one of those finger traps where you try to pull, you got all this pressure coming towards you, so you push even more, right? So I can't tell if it's him buying into it or if he's just peeling back the curtain more, if he's always been like this and he's getting more comfortable. So it's funny how in our fight breakdowns, as people that watch kicks and punches, you also kind of have to play armchair psychologist as well, and because mind games I do think play a big part in what goes on here. So it's a little tough to figure out, but I do think that we haven't seen him really get too rattled up until this point, right? And this is coming in with a lot more pressure. There's a lot more haters. There's a lot more, people that there's a lot more spotlight. There's a lot more of him having to defend himself, outside the cage just with what he's saying. And so who knows? I mean, we haven't seen him be under this sort of pressure before or really even be close to it. So it's really, really hard for me to say. I think at the press conferences and stuff, like in terms of him looking rattled or anything, I haven't seen that. I mean, he's leaned continually more far into some of the stuff that he said. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it's not going to play as much of a factor as maybe it would with some other fighters.
Yeah, because I've only interviewed Bryce once, and it was during COVID, and he mostly talked about how COVID isn't real. That was like kind of the main thing that we spoke about, and I wrote 2 articles out of it, one about the fight, one about him calling COVID not real, and he just retweeted the COVID one. So I feel like Bryce has always been kind of like that, just like you said, he just didn't have the spotlight on him as much as he does now. Obviously, after his podcast episode and stuff, it's like everybody wants to talk to him now. There's a lot of spotlight. UFC know what they're doing. We've had 2 press conferences now when it comes to UFC 314. He's just, like you said, he's playing into it. So I agree with you. I don't think it's going to affect his performance. I think he knows what he needs to do. John Silva knows what he needs to do. But yeah, I mean, according to BetMGM, Silva minus 200, Mitchell plus 165. We've got Mitchell plus 500 by submission, plus 1,400 by knockout TKO, plus 350 by decision. So a lot of money to be made on Mitchell, period. And then when you look at John Silva, minus 110 by knockout or a TKO. So that's interesting. Is that what you're leaning towards?
I am. I think, who knows? I mean, now that I say this will probably go the distance, but I like to think that one way or the other that it's going to end inside. I think we're going to get a finish of some sort, a very decisive, who's better than who here moment.
So you're going by knockout. What am I going by? I don't know. Well, I mean, Silva's never been finished. Can Bryce submit him? I think maybe he can. Plus 500 by submission. I don't know. Maybe I'd go Bryce decision, actually. I'm going to go Bryce decision. So you're going to go Silva by knockout. I'm going to go Bryce by decision. Okay. There we go. Moving on to the next fight. Yair Rodriguez, Patricio Pitbull. Pitbull's UFC debut. Did you expect Pitbull? I think somebody asked me this question. I don't know if it was at SBC or maybe overreaction time. And I think Simon had asked me, should it be Pico or Pitbull who gets signed? I said sign them both. And that wasn't even like an answer that made too much sense at the time when I answered it, because a lot of people are like, Pitbull's old, the UFC aren't going to go for it. But I said sign them both. Why not? And I'm glad to see that he got signed. And I'm glad that he's on a main card and a fight like Yair Rodriguez. Did you expect the UFC to sign Pitbull?
I did and I didn't, because it's one of those things where I would say that I did. It was a bit of a roller coaster, because I think Pitbull put all his eggs in one basket, right? He made it known that he didn't want to fight for PFL anymore, and he was making a lot of money for them. He was on a big contract, but he wanted to stay active, right? So I don't think he would have made that move to leave if he didn't have some sort of assurance. And I'm not saying there was any tampering or anything going on here, but I think there's vibes that can be felt out, right, between managers and promotions about interest. I think he wouldn't have left if he didn't think the UFC was interested. Now, it seemed like once he got there, they weren't necessarily interested. It was a little bit behind the scenes, more of a struggle and more of back and forth. And, the UFC is saying they're kind of not interested. And then it seemed like, from what I'd heard, Hunter Campbell was just kind of the guy that came in and really pushed it over the finish line. He had kind of there were some dissenting opinions of whether or not they wanted to sign a 37-year-old guy who potentially was on the decline. I'm sure he's not making as much money in the UFC as he was PFL. He's made, from my understanding, like generational wealth from the fight purses that he was getting on his Bellator contract. But I'm sure that he's making a decent amount. So the UFC did, invest more than they would want to invest on just an outside signing on him. So I think that was part of it. And then also it seemed like for a while there, like, where does he fit? Right. Like there was a limbo where it seemed like they had come to terms that, we're interested in bringing him on. We've agreed to money, but we got to make sure that there are fights for him, that where he fits in this division. And so he was in a little bit of a limbo there for a while. I know he's publicly said that Aljamain Sterling turned him down. It does sound like that was true. I think Aljo's even acknowledged that the timeline didn't add up. And here he is with Yair Rodriguez, which I think is like the perfect first matchup. I think this is just stylistically, it's exciting for both guys. For Yair, it's a bit of a rebound fight. I'm not going anywhere. I'll go out there and beat the Bellator GOAT, and probably an exciting fight. And for Pitbull, it's like, hey, here's a guy that's contended for the title. He's been an interim champion, right? So let's go out there and show, like, let me show the world that this isn't something that I'm trying to do 2 years from now. Like, the time is now. And being on this card with Volkanovski and Lopez, for him, he aligns himself perfectly to be in the conversation if he goes out there and looks impressive. So I think this is A+ matchmaking, whether it was intentional, whether it was just kind of, how the situation played out, and this was the option they were left with. But just great stuff. I think one of the most intriguing fights, probably the fight I'm looking forward to the most on the card. I know maybe I'm a little bit biased because of all the Bellator events I worked over the years during COVID and everything, but I'm just really intrigued to finally see. It's so weird, right? Pitbull with a UFC fight kit and gloves on. I'm super excited for this one.
Yeah, and for me, the reason why I felt like he could get signed, so obviously after they signed Michael Chandler, MVP, they're up there in age as well. They do bring maybe more of a personality than Pitbull does. And I think that's a bit more of a language barrier type of thing. I think Pitbull for, adequate amount of English. I don't know how you would rate his English.
Yeah, so my understand, like, he can understand everything, but I think you even watch his interviews sometimes, like he did one with Megan O'Leary before this fight, like a studio thing. And I saw some people saying, well, he answered the last couple in English. Like, why doesn't he just speak the whole thing? My understanding is with him, like, he wants to be able to make sure what he says is like what he means. So I think his English is actually pretty good, but he also understands there's limitations. And if he wants to give like a good detailed answer, he'd prefer that it gets said with maybe a few words that he doesn't know or he's not comfortable with. So I think his English is good. Maybe he's going to work on it some more. I think he always did a good job, I think, at connecting with people that are watching it. I think it's just more of an issue of, like you said, having kind of this North American centralized audience who maybe for Michael Chandler, right, they don't have to jump through the hoops of a translator to understand what he's saying. So we'll see, but I think he'll get there through his performances.
Yeah, because I can always appreciate someone trying to speak English, but I think of someone like Yuri Prohaska, who strikes me as a really thoughtful guy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, and I don't mean this in any way, but like, sometimes when I'm listening to him or I'm transcribing a story or stuff, and I'm like, man, I feel like there's so much he wants to say, but it's just not coming through in English because I don't know, not an adequate amount of vocabulary and stuff like that. But I do respect that he's trying. But he's one of those guys that I wish did the 50-50 thing, where some in English, some in his native tongue. But like, yeah, like I get it when you mean that, because sometimes they just can't express themselves like fully, and there's a lot of insightful things that they want to say. But yeah, but I think he does, like, regardless of that, I think people are intrigued to watch him fight, and it is an intriguing stylistic matchup. I am looking forward to this fight because I picked Yair. I think you picked Pitbull, right? Did you pick Pitbull?
I did pick Pitbull, I believe. Yeah, I honestly don't feel super confident in that.
Neither do I.
Yeah, because there's a couple things I think here. One is, like, it sounds so cliche and simple, but I do see a lot of the Michael Chandler sort of situation in him. And so with Chandler, when he made the jump, I mean, people were all excited. It was during COVID. It was right at Connor card. He's going to fight Dan Hooker, blah, 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 blah. But like, Chandler had some kind of not great performances in Bellator shortly before he got signed, right? People were, in my opinion, I was like, he's kind of declining. Like, we're not going to get the best Michael Chandler. His UFC record's not great, but he's gone to war with the best of the best in the UFC, and he's exceeded my expectations. So I kind of feel similar about Pitbull. Like, we saw him lose in Rise, and he got knocked out for the first time ever. We saw him try to go to bantamweight and fight Sergio Pettis. So I'm not ruling out that the best Pitbull that we've seen has already happened, and that he's going to go out there. He could get, scissor head kicked by Yair or flying knee or something. But at the same time, I do wonder if there's a certain motivation that comes with being in the UFC, right? Like, we talk about getting a fire lit under you again. Like, talk about having something to prove. Talk about not the unknown of what you're getting yourself involved with. Like, I think if anything's going to reignite an aging fighter to look young again, it's going to be this sort of a brand switch up.
Yeah, and you look at the stylistic matchup as well, you just feel that the path to victory is there for him on the ground against Yair, which is obviously we've seen him struggle. Yair did talk a lot about changes that he's made. I know he trains at the camp with Bilal Muhammad, and that camp's kind of on fire with Juliana and Ignacio and stuff. So that's obviously got to motivate him. The loss to Volkanovski, it's I guess you don't have to fault him too much for that. He had that amazing fight with Max Holloway. That's a loss on his record, but that was a great performance. The Ortega one is the one that maybe that's the reason why a lot of people, because, you're only as good as your last fight. That's the way a lot of people look at it. But I don't know. I just feel Yair's size, his unorthodox striking. Maybe. I don't know about a knockout. Maybe I'd go Yair decision is what I'm thinking. But at the same time, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if Pitbull just took him down a few times and won there. But I don't know. It's tough. I'm thinking Yair by decision. You envision he's a minus 155 favorite, by the way, over Pitbull, who's plus 130. Are you surprised considering Yair's most recent performance?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think there's a lot of unfamiliarity with Pitbull. I think the age thing is the biggest concern people see here. They go to their Tapology. They see those losses I mentioned. I do expect him to break out his wrestling a lot. I think working with Captain Eric, Henry Cejudo, he does. Maybe we don't see it a ton. Like, you go to his highlights and it's him knocking out Michael Chandler and Pedro Carvalho and Daniel Weichel. But when he first got into it, he was a grappling guy. He was a jiu-jitsu ace. And so since then, he's improved his striking, and we've seen those knockouts. But he has worked with a very wrestling-centric team. So I think he's going to grind it out. I think it will be a decision on Pitbull's end. I could be for Yair too. I think it is a very close fight. But yeah, it will be interesting. The other thing is too, I'm trying to think when the last time, I guess maybe the Ryzen fight was one, but Pitbull doesn't prepare for a lot of 3-round fights. So how will that come into play, right? Will his gas tank, will his pace, will his aggression increase because he doesn't have to worry about those other 2 rounds? Quite possible as well. I mean, he's been in a bazillion title fights in the last decade. And I'd have to go back and look, but not many 3-round fights for him.
Well, I'll take a look for you. Well, yeah, so it's Jeremy Kennedy's title fight. He had the catchweight bout at Ryzen. That must
have been 3, right?
That must have been 3. I'm trying to think. I believe so. But yeah, I get your point. Obviously, it's been a ton of, because he's simultaneous champ. It's been a lot of championship fights for him. If I look at the odds so you're going Pitbull decision, that's plus 350. Yeah, your decision would be plus 125. So yeah, but I think I agree. I think this is going to be a close fight. I see very obvious strategy from both ends. I think Yair knows that Pitbull is probably going to... No, I'm not saying Pitbull can't stand in the area, but Yair is just kind of awkward with the kicks. And we saw Pitbull kind of struggle a little bit. I know I don't want to put too much weight on it. Again, no pun intended, because he was at bantamweight. But we did that matchup looking at him and Sergio Pettis, the kicks and how he handled that. I don't know. I feel like Yair is coming with this fire. We saw him in the press conference with Diego Lopez. I know a lot of people can say he's not focusing on the right thing, but I think it's the opposite. I think Yair knows that... Because it's crazy, you rewind back a little bit, if Topuria didn't vacate and he had that performance against Brian Ortega, you would have pushed Yair completely out of the title picture, right? But now you look at the heat with Diego Lopez. You look at the fact that it's a vacant title fight between Volkanovski and Lopez. Can Yair win? Can the UFC look at this and say, well, if Lopez wins, Yair wins, we have a massive fight here? I don't know. We talked about kind of the lack of stars, the lack of big fights. I feel like Yair knows that a win here could do a lot for him, where maybe a couple of months ago it wouldn't have been the case.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sportsmanship and stuff, but I've always really enjoyed when there's like an actual rivalry, right? Like John Jones and DC is one of my favorite rivalries ever because it was so authentic, right? There was nothing fabricated. It wasn't Connor versus, Dustin Poirier with some terrible trash talk, or James Vick and Justin Gaethje just, wanting us to have them yanked off the stage when they're at that press conference a while back. Like when you get an actual backstory with heat, I buy into it. I'm such a fan of that, right? And we saw that on the press conference this week. I think it's been a while since we've seen something that authentic. So I can only imagine for the fans in Mexico, for the Spanish-speaking fans, like watching something like that, how much they could get invested in the UFC. I mean, they're not stupid. They love this stuff, right? So I'm sure that's the one. If we're going to say they, have some internal feelings about what they hope happens. I mean, a Diego versus Yair title fight after this, somewhere in, with that, especially with the fight coming up, the pay-per-view at the end of the year, the Noche UFC event, like there's your headliner. There's the storylines are all built in right there. So I'm sure if that happens, I think we're in for a real treat, a real build-up, and honestly, a really good fight too that might get buried by all that stuff.
I feel like you could do that fight regardless. Not if Yair loses and Lopez wins, but if both lose, or if Yair wins and Lopez loses, I don't know. I feel like there are many scenarios where you could still, like, it's kind of like, why not capitalize and do that fight on that card, I feel, regardless, except for the outcome I said. Except if Lopez wins and Yair loses, then that wouldn't make too much sense. But yeah, I just feel like there's a big, and we were talking about this, like they did it in Spanish. And did the UFC actually translate it? Because I saw it kind of ripped from other channels, but was it the UFC that actually translated it?
Yeah, I think I saw that on Embedded they had put some subtitles.
Okay, that's where they ripped it from, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, kind of chopped up a little bit, but Fabiano did his best. I thought he did pretty good there, playing both parts of the script. But yeah, I'd like to. Danny Segura did for us. He did a little breakdown or a little translation as well. So there's obviously a whole backstory there, things that if that fight does get booked, like we'll hear all about it. I'm sure what the origins of this is.
But yeah, that's what I'm saying. I love that they did it in Spanish because I just feel like in English they wouldn't have really gotten their points across. So yeah, there you go. But an intriguing fight nonetheless. It's hard. I mean, a lot of them are just could be the people's main events, right? Like we just broke this one down. But Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett is definitely a lot of people's picks because that almost feels like guaranteed. Like the other ones could not play out in the most entertaining fashion, depending on each fighter's game plan. When I think about Bryce Mitchell, John Silva, and Yair and Pitbull, but Chandler and Pimblett, I feel like, or I don't know, can you even jinx a Chandler fight? You can't, right? You can't jinx a Michael Chandler fight. No. You can't, right?
It's not possible. I mean, he's on that. That's just Justin Gaethje's had some slower fights recently. I was going to say him as well, but yeah, I mean Chandler thus far. I mean, people can criticize his win-loss record and everything, but man, like you just get a dogfight every time, and you'd think eventually his chin would really break, and it hasn't. And hopefully that's not putting any sort of hex on Mike, but like that's why when I saw you talked earlier about the odds being screwed up, I was shocked when this fight got announced. I was like, Chandler's going to be heavy favorite, and now he's an underdog. So don't know how that's necessarily possible, but maybe I'm buying in too much to some of those wars we've seen.
But this is proof of the whole you're only as good as your last fight type of thing. Because remember when Paddy fought Jared Gordon, look what everybody was saying, right? Like everyone screamed robbery, which was fine, but everyone started talking about how overrated Paddy was, this isn't that. And then rebounds, I guess the Tony Ferguson fight, a lot of people put an asterisk just because of Ferguson's form. But then the quick submission of King Green, and then all of a sudden he's a favorite over Michael Chandler because people are looking at the Chandler fight against Oliver. And Chandler himself admitted that he took that loss really hard. Like you see the other fights, like the war with Justin Gaethje, with Dustin Poirier, he had his moments. The Charles Oliveira fight, I think he did a good job of kind of like, yeah, he did rally late. He hurt Charles late. But outside of that, and outside of him like slamming him down from the backpack, you look at it earlier and it was kind of like, where's Chandler at right now kind of thing. Like, is he on the decline? Charles Oliveira is amazing, don't get me wrong. But I think the majority of that fight, I expected him to do better is what I'm trying to say. I did pick Charles to win, but I expected Chandler to do better in that fight. He took the loss hard, and I think that's maybe why the odds are the way they are. I don't know. Do you feel like you talked about in general, like Chandler being on a decline, but was that kind of telling for you, that performance against Charles, that maybe Mike is just not going to be in the title picture at all moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, that was the least competitive fight I think we've seen from him for a while, right? He had the slam, but even though he was fighting a great guy, like top tier fighter, I think it was kind of evident that maybe he was a step below Charles, and it could be a style thing or whatever. But you got to think too, like this is a big step up for Paddy.
Yeah.
Going from Bobby Green to Michael Chandler, I don't care. You know, Bobby's a tough guy, but like there's ways to beat him, right? We've seen him get knocked out. Chandler, I don't necessarily know like how Paddy does it. Is he gonna, Paddy's got a very underrated ground game, I think. But he's also his big deficiency is his striking defense. So if he gets in a war with Chandler, I mean, we've seen him get hurt by much lesser fighters. His first couple of UFC fights, he got stunned on the feet. So Bobby Green didn't really have that opportunity to crack him. Tony Ferguson didn't really have that opportunity to crack him, and that was due to Paddy, clearly doing a good job defensively with his footwork and his head movement. But I feel like if you fight Michael Chandler, you're probably going to get hit. So how does Paddy Pimblett handle that? That's the big question here. And for Chandler, I think there are some, him struggling against Oliveira, there are some similarities between Oliveira and Pimblett in terms of their approach, in terms of their skill set. I'm not trying to put those two on the same level by any means, but just in terms of the threats that they provide, I think are similar. So I don't know. It's one of the more, again, great matchmaking by the UFC. When this got announced, I know I'd been rumored a little bit, but when it actually was real, taking a step back, I was like, man, this is just such a weird fight in a number of different ways. But that's what I love. I get sucked in by the weirdness of MMA that we don't get from other sports. So shout out to the UFC for making this. And I'm clearly way off from what the odds are. So there's a wide range of opinion on how it's going to happen when they get in there.
Yeah, and Paddy seems very confident that Scousers don't get knocked out. But I think for me, I would worry if I'm Paddy and I'm standing in front of Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler doesn't care. Like, he swings and he's got a mean overhand right. He's got a mean left as well. And he fights like, yeah, we criticize his IQ, but he's kind of always game throughout the fight. And it is 5 rounds, which makes it even more interesting. And I know Chandler has a tendency to slow down. Paddy's been a minute that we've seen him in a 5-round fight. But I don't know. If Paddy goes out, like, I believe strategically, Paddy should go out there and just try to take him down, try to force Mike to grapple, because Chandler is very explosive, but at the same time, he does take a lot of risks, and maybe Paddy can whip up a submission. But at the same time, if you go out there with a very grapple-heavy approach and don't find success early, that could zap out your energy. So is that what you want to do as well? So Paddy seems to be in the belief, like that's what he says in media. We don't know what he's going to go out there and do, but he seems to believe that a lot of it is going to play out on the feet. How long do you want to stand in front of Michael Chandler, who just swings like he doesn't care? So yeah, that's what makes it interesting. Because if this was a 3-round fight, I'd be a little bit more confident in my Paddy pick, which is the opposite of what a lot of people are thinking. A lot of people think that, 5 rounds, and maybe, you know what, I'm more confident in Paddy. It's the opposite for me, because I think 3-round fight, you're Paddy Pimblett, you go out there and you just grapple Michael Chandler. You see that Dustin Poirier is submitted. And I know Dustin Poirier's ground game is underrated. It's hard to judge him when you're putting him up against Islam and Habib. Like, that's a bit unfair to judge him like that. I know he's got underrated ground game, but Dustin Poirier is not, you don't think submission or grappling when you think Dustin Poirier, right? So if you're Paddy Pimblett and you see that Dustin Poirier submitted Michael Chandler and he found his success on the ground, granted that Chandler did take him down, I think if you're Paddy Pimblett, you just go out there and you grapple Michael Chandler, make him grapple, work your submission, your slick submission game, but that could zap out his energy if he doesn't find too much success early, right? Or are we just going to get 2 gassed guys by round 3? I don't know. How do you see this one playing out?
No, I think you're right. If I'm Pimblett, I'm trying to make this gross. I honestly, that's kind of the theme of tonight in some of these fights. Like, we look at the Yair and Pitbull fight, right? Exciting. This could be fun, banger. Like, if I'm Pitbull, why not go for my wrestling? And I feel the same way with Pimblett. Like, yeah, Chandler's blood and guts. Everybody's excited. There's 5 rounds. You might feel like you're better than the guy on the feet or whatever at this point in your career, but like, why not just go right to your strength, right? Make it gross, kind of take them down, hold them, like cage work, all that sort of stuff. So I know people are probably booing at their phones and computers hearing me say this, but like, if I'm Pimblett, that's the smart move. That's the one that I think is the clearest way to victory in this fight. Again, we know he's a grappler. I think everybody gives him credit. I think he's way better on the ground than I ever thought he would be watching him in Cage Warriors. So that's what I would do if I was Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's just trying to bait Michael Chandler into thinking that this is going to be like a stand-up war. But yeah, if I'm Paddy Pimblett, I wouldn't even, because Mike's so explosive, especially in the early rounds. We've seen him have success with a strike, and you just don't want to go there early. Like we haven't.
Plus,
Yeah.
like we saw, Mike against Charles, like he struggled with some of the grappling stuff, and
Yeah.
Charles was able to kind of work his grappling. So the blueprint is there,
Yeah, I was surprised how much success. This sounds very silly because of Charles Oliveira's skill set, but Charles Oliveira is not like D2 wrestling, right? He's just like that crazy slick submission guy. But considering that Chandler's wrestling background, I was kind of like baffled at how much success and how much ease Charles had with the grappling against Michael Chandler, which I'm sure Paddy Pimblett has looked at. But yeah, if I'm Paddy, you just ignore the crowd. I know I said we can't possibly jinx this fight, but maybe I just did with this breakdown. But I don't know. If I'm Paddy Pimblett, like ignore the crowd. Chandler's going to try to make it fun. I know he'll probably stick his tongue out if he's in bad grappling positions. But if you're a Paddy, you know how big this opportunity is. You know that a loss could potentially set you back in terms of like getting to the upper echelon of the division. And there are like lightweight is just stacked. Some people look at Chandler as his perfect ticket to the top, right? Lightweight is stacked. If you lose to a Chandler, it's like there aren't too many favorable matchups at 155 if you want to get back up there. So if you're Paddy Pimblett, just kind of make it boring. But I don't know. We'll find out. I picked Paddy. I don't know. Who did you pick?
I picked Michael Chandler. Yeah.
We're literally not agreeing on anything. Okay.
Well, somebody's gonna win big tonight, and the other person's not. Well, I guess we could go 3-2, but
That's
2-3. But yeah, I'm going with Chandler. I feel pretty confident. I don't know if we'll be inside the distance or not. I'm kind of still. That might be like a game time decision for me. Sounds like a little bit of a cop out. So for the sake of this prediction, I think it's going to be a decision. When in doubt, pick the decision.
Okay, so Pimblett is a -160 favorite. Chandler plus 135. You're going Chandler by decision plus 600. So Nolan's trying to make a lot of money tonight, is what I'm understanding from this.
Parlay my picks and become a millionaire.
And what am I going? Can I see Chandler? Sorry, Pimblett winning 5-round decision. I don't know. I can't see any of them winning a 5-round decision. I feel like with the way this fight's gonna go, no one's just gonna have the energy by the time the 25 minutes go. But let me think. What am I going? So Pimblett decisions plus 650, plus 225 by submission, plus 250 by knockout. I'll go plus 225 Paddy by submission, although I don't know, Nolan. But yeah, either way, I just feel like if it hits like 4 and 5, these guys are going to be exhausted. It's going to get sloppy, which lucky Miami crowd if it does, I guess, right? But
yep.
not lucky for people betting because they'll be sweating. But either way, I think Michael Chandler is going to find a way to make it entertaining, even though Paddy Pimblett, in my opinion, his method to victory should not be very entertaining. But we'll find out in a matter of hours. We got to obviously talk about the main event before we wrap up. Alexander Volkanovski, Diego Lopez. I feel like on any other card, be talking about this way more, but I feel like it's just being overshadowed by the fights we just talked about and the storylines. But nonetheless, an amazing fight. Did you think this was the right matchup for the vacant title after Topuria vacated? Did you think it would be Lopez over Evloev? UFC-wise, I totally understand why they picked Diego Lopez, but do you think it was the right move?
It's tough. I see the argument both ways. I'm very much more on the merit side of things, but I think Diego's kind of carved out a solid argument for himself as well, right? Like if you look at the wins that he had, Evloev hasn't lost since he beat Diego, so it's a weird one. But the circumstances of Diego's fight against him and the fact it was close, his debut on short notice. So I get it. I get where the UFC's coming from. I think, unfortunately, for Movsar, I mean, he's just another, sacrificial lamb of the UFC wanting to put on, the most exciting fights possible. And I get where they're coming from as well. So I love the fight. I mean, like you said, I think it's almost not getting enough attention. Even though it's the main event. And for me, like, I don't know if it's necessarily the closest in my head. Like, I kind of feel like I'm fence sitting on, it could go one of two ways. And I don't think it's going to be a close fight. I just don't know which of these two paths the fight's going to go down. Like, how's Volk's chin going to hold up? I think that's kind of the big thing for me. And then for Diego, like, if it does hold up, I think it won't. I think Volk's veteran savvy and being there before, been there, done that, 5 rounds, no problem sort of thing is gonna be, huge benefit for him. And I think that if his chin holds up, he will win fairly decisively. So it's a weird kind of choose your own adventure here, two sides of the coin, but I do love the fight. I think it's fantastic, really high level MMA and in a weird scenario of Topuria leaving the belt behind, we still have, sometimes you get these vacant fights when the champion doesn't lose, and it kind of feels like, whoever wins this isn't really the champion. I feel like this division is so good right now. These two guys are so good right now that feeling won't necessarily be there. Like, sure, people always talk about wanting to see the Topuria versus, I don't know, we've already seen Topuria versus Volk, but if Diego wins, people will talk about wanting to see that matchup, and we may never see it. But I feel like there's no question that, like, whoever wins this belt is the champion and will be able to be promoted by the UFC as such, and people will tune in and be excited, whether it's Yair, whether it's Pitbull, whether whoever's waiting around the corner. I think this division's so strong, and this is just a great, great fight. Not a lot of trash talk, not a lot of unnecessary drama, just fighting, just good characters, just excitement. So I'm stoked for it.
Yeah, because considering that Topuria, obviously in many people's eyes, left featherweight too early because of, Diego Lopez being there, Movsar Evloev being there, there were still fights for him to take. So that's why I agree with you. Like, if he had wiped out the division, then maybe it would be difficult for the UFC to promote. But there were still a lot of fights out there for Ilia Topuria. But yeah, I agree with you. It's one of two ways, in my opinion. Either Lopez catches him, because I just didn't like Volkanovski's reactions to Topuria's power shots. The way he had was backing up. He had success with the jab. He did, touch up Topuria. Topuria's a little marked up here and stuff, but I just didn't like his reactions to kind of Topuria's power shots. And we know that Diego's probably going to come out as a bat out of hell. But do you come out like a bat out of hell? Because I think the narrative is pretty simple out there. People questioning Diego's cardio, if he does not catch Volk early, will he have the energy to go 5 rounds? I know people judge him off of that fight against Dan Ige, but it was multiple weight cuts. So maybe that's why he kind of slowed down. But if you're Diego Lopez, do you bank on that and say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? That's what I do. I go out there and I steamroll people. Volkanovski's been knocked out a couple of times. I know Diego is probably confident he has the power to do that regardless. Or do you play a more tactical game? But then if you do that, you're allowing Volk to build up confidence, right? So it's kind of tough. What do you do if you're Diego Lopez?
I don't know. It's a great question. I kind of like I don't have a good solution. And there's a lot smarter people with great MMA minds that I'm sure are in his corner and advising him. But I do very much think you've got to kind of stick with what got you to the dance, right? It's just an ultimate, it ultimately comes down to who's better. And if you're confident you're better than Alexander Volkanovski, then you got to go out there and do what you've always done. And maybe you have that kind of back, something in your back pocket game plan. I know he's been working with David Taylor, with Wyatt Hendrickson at Oklahoma State University at the wrestling team over there. So I don't know how telling that is about what he's going to try to bring into this fight. I mean, he's got a great grappling background. He's got really good jiu-jitsu credentials. We don't really see it as much because he's been knocking people out, hurting people on the feet. So I wouldn't be shocked if maybe he tries to go back to his real roots here and tries again. Sorry, Miami, if everybody's going to be booing after every one of these fights, but again, try out the grappling. Let's see what you got there. I mean, that's your thing, and you haven't really showed it a lot. You might have a secret weapon. So I would come out aggressive. I would come out, do what he usually does. And if things take a turn, then you have all these things to fall back on as well.
Or a promo of "don't watch the fights tonight" type of thing, the way we're breaking down the fight. I think people are just gonna lose hope completely if this main card somehow does not turn out or live up to the hype. I think people are really gonna give up hope on the UFC. So for the UFC's sake, let's hope that strategically these fights don't go that way. But I understand where you're coming from, because if you're Volkanovski, he said it in a recent interview, I can't remember with who, but he said, I just basically don't feel like I could lose a decision or a whole fight to anybody except Islam, which obviously that fight was super close. He just feels like unless you catch him, he can't lose. That's how confident he is in his skill set. And obviously he's gone up against many different stylistic matchups in his title reign. But Diego being so dangerous in both ends with his knockout power and with his jiu-jitsu, it's if you're Volk, do you stick and move and try to be defensively responsible in the beginning because you know how Diego is going to come out? Or do you try to incorporate your grappling? Is it a good idea to put Diego Lopez on his back because he's so dangerous there as well? So it's kind of tricky. I know Volk's very confident in his cardio. So regardless of the pace of this fight, I don't think he's going to have a problem. But if you're Diego, do you pace yourself because, you don't want to gas out, but at the same time, that probably your best way to beat Volk is to go right at him. It's tough. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because when I'm looking at the odds here, So Volkanovski is a minus 155 favorite over Lopez, who's plus 130, which means odds makers probably believe that maybe we could just very well see the old Volkanovski back. But then it's like Diego by decision is plus 550. I don't see Diego winning by decisions. I expected that to be like plus 1100 or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird. Like, impossible is nothing, I know, but looking at some of these individual odds, so it's like Lopez by submission is plus 600, Lopez by knockouts plus 300, so the most likely option for him. And then Volk by decisions plus 150, plus 300 by knockout, plus 1600 by submission. So I got Volk by decision at plus 150. How about you?
Yeah, we actually agreed on the final pick. So
yeah,
it was, again, tough for me because it's like Volk taking those 2 bad knockouts in a row. Like, what does that do for your career? But look at who they were against. They were close together. Now he's taking some time off. I will, if people have watched my picks before, 8 or 9 times out of 10, I usually side with kind of the proven, the guy that we've seen be able to handle a title fight. We've seen be able to take on opponents of different styles. We've seen be able to battle through adversity. And Diego definitely had a run pre-UFC that helped him with some of this stuff as well. He had 20 plus fights. He had lost on Contender Series. He's gone through those moments as well. He's battled through adversity in fights. So I'm not saying that, but I just think there's such a difference when you're doing it. It's great to do it, period, but it's really different to do it at a championship level. And Volkanovski, one of the greatest featherweights of all time, this is just another day in the office for him, right? Sure, he's got maybe his back up against the wall a little bit more pressure, but he's been there, done that. And I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, and the confidence thing, because this makes me think of like when I watched Topuria and Max, and I can't even remember who I picked. Maybe I picked Topuria just because I've been high on him pre-UFC. I did pick Volk though over Topuria, but I think I picked Topuria over Max. But I think a lot of people looked at that fight and said, "Look, you're not going to knock out Max. Don't come out super aggressively. It's 5 rounds. Max thrives." And Topuria is so confident that he went at him. He was throwing and lunging and basically all the things that you would probably think you tell him not to do, he did. Because that's how confident he was that he was going to knock out Max Holloway. And that's kind of what I'm thinking of with this fight. How confident is Diego Lopez? Is what it's going to come down to for me. Like, are you that confident in your finishing abilities that you just throw away all those narratives of like, yeah, you could potentially gas out, pace yourself, yada, yada, yada? Because Topuria has that crazy confidence, right? The type of confidence that some people call delusional. With obviously he's proven that it's not. But I mean, the stuff he says, right? With Diego Lopez, does he have that kind of confidence where, you know what, I can run through Alexander Volkanovski? Forget this 5-round narrative, forget the cardio narrative. Like, I can just, so that's what it's going to come down to, in my opinion. Is Diego Lopez just going to ignore all that narratives and be like, you know what, I can finish anybody? Because if it's like that, then unfortunately, I could very well see him go out there and just flatline Volk, which I'm sure would break the heart of everybody.
Yeah, I see all those people on Twitter taking the Topuria and Islam knockouts and like blurring it and things, like censored, too graphic to watch. So yeah, that would be tough to watch. Just from, again, I like both these guys so much.
Yeah, same.
I think Diego's going to be the first, if he wins, will be the first on the doorstep fighter to win a UFC title since I've been doing that. So we go back a ways, and then Volk's just like the ultimate professional. So it's nice. We always root for there to be more, professionalism and sportsmanship and stuff. At least I do. And then we get them matched up against each other, and that's like, damn, we're gonna be really happy for one of them, and then we're gonna be really sad for the other as well. So I guess that's just the life we live as MMA fans, right?
Yeah. Well, we're gonna find out in a matter of moments. But before we wrap up, and I like to do this every single time, give me kind of your 4 bonus winners. Could be all performance. One of them could be fight of the night. But who, in your opinion, is going to walk away with an extra $50K tonight?
I think fight of the night, Darren Elkins and Julian Erosa on the undercard. That just screams kind of one of those Steeler sort of fights. I think that this is tough. The winner, this is, again, I'm not trying to cop out. The winner of John Silva and Bryce Mitchell, I think we'll get a performance bonus because we'll either get a slick submission or we'll get a knockout. And I feel pretty comfortable that somebody's going to get a finish in that one. And then it's tough, I don't know. Maybe the winner of Yair and Pitbull as well. Maybe somebody will get a finish there.
All right. Well, there you have it. Nolan, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much. Guys, we've got multiple people on side. We've got Danny Segura, we've got Abby Kamikaze, and we've got Mike Bond on side giving you all the coverage. Don't forget to join Georgian Goes at 8 p.m. Eastern for the watch along. Have some fun and watch the fights with them. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll have you covered in all facets on MMA Junkie. Enjoy.